friends. I know a couple of folks have expressed concern that the stores are running low on bread these days. And since I am a hobby bread baker, I thought I just wanted to show real quick how easy it is to actually make your own bread with just a few simple ingredients. So I use my KitchenAid quite a lot. If you have a bread maker, you're welcome to use that. This can even be done by hand. It just takes a little bit more elbow grease and time, but I will show you how to do it with the KitchenAid. So for a basic French bread recipe, all you really need is flour. I typically use bread flour, but we can get away with using all-purpose flour. Salt, it doesn't really matter whether it's iodized or not, and yeast. I tend to use active dry, but you can also use instant yeast. It's not a one-for-one exchange, so I'll tell you how to change the ratios appropriately for whether you have instant yeast instead of active dry. Because I do have active dry, that means I need to activate the yeast. So I'm going to start first with putting some water in my bowl. Using my cute half cup with the broken handle. So that's 1.5 cups of warm water, and then I'm going to use 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry yeast, which is about the amount that is in a packet. So if you buy the yeast packets, you can just dump the whole thing in. So 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry. If you use instant yeast, that would be 1.5 teaspoons. The proportion is 2 teaspoons of instant yeast is 3 teaspoons of active dry. So the ratio in this case is 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry would equate to 1.5 teaspoons of instant. So 1, 2, and I'm going to guesstimate 1/4. Alright, so now for the active dry yeast, that needs to sit in the warm water, take a nice little bath for a few minutes until it starts foaming up. If we were doing instant yeast, that would just go straight in the dry ingredients. But for now, we'll let this sit, and we'll be back. So now we've given the active dry yeast a chance to activate. It looks a little bit frothy on top. So we can go ahead and continue adding the rest of the ingredients. Again, if you use instant yeast, then how you would do this mix is just combine the flour, the salt, and the yeast together, mix those up, and then add the water. In this case, because we have active dry yeast, we had to do the water and the yeast together first, and now we'll add the salt and the flour. So, for salt, we're going to have 1.5 teaspoons. So this is my 1/2 tablespoon here. So add the salt, and then we're going to have 4 cups of flour. One, 2, 3, and 4. So then, I'm going to talk before turning on the machine since it'll be a little noisy. I'm going to turn it on to speed 1 first. So first put down the head, lock it. Turn it to speed 1 first until everything looks like it's gotten moistened and flour's not going to be flung everywhere. And then it just go up to speed 2. So for the speed 1 is just the mixing part, and then for speed 2 is to complete the mixing and begin the kneading process. So we'll go ahead and start at 1. So right now the flour is just starting to get incorporated with the water, and we're nearly at the point where it should be stable enough to speed it up. This is also the point where you can kind of start to watch it and see if it might need a little bit more of either flour or water. Weather can actually play a role in that. Looking pretty good, so I'll show you. So it's about this consistency in the bowl. Still pretty sloppy, but you can see that it's starting to incorporate and it should be safe to speed up the mix. But really with bread, the highest you ever want to go is 2. You don't need to whip this stuff up. So going up to 2. And now with the KitchenAid, we'll need to go about 8 minutes, and I'll show you what the dough looks like at that point and what we're shooting for. Alright, so we've been going about 8 minutes here. So I'm going to check the dough to see if we have kneaded it enough. And we're checking now to see if the gluten has gotten strong enough here. So what we do is we just take a chunk of dough and I roll it in a ball and start to gently stretch it into a sheet. And if I had done this in the first minute of mixing, it would have just torn apart at this point. So we keep getting thinner and thinner, and we are getting holes, but that's fine. When you can start to see light through the other side of it, which is hard to show in this angle, but that's when you know that the gluten has developed enough. You can also see that the dough is a little bit sticky, but I'm not getting a ton on my fingers, so we're at about the right consistency here. So at this point, we are done with the mixing and the kneading. So I'm done with the dough hook. So at this point, we just need to cover it and let it get through its first rise. So I like to just kind of bundle up the dough into a nice little ball. And then I have my spray grease. Just grease the bowl a bit. Plop the dough down once. Pick it back up. Turn it over and sit it back down. So it's about that size now. I'm going to cover it in plastic. And just set it aside, and it'll do its first rise for about an hour. We want to come back when it's about doubled. Alright, so it's been an hour. And the bread has, or the dough has nicely risen, so you can see here. So now it's time to shape it. So I'm just going to gently dump it out, kind of catch it with my hand. There we go. And then we're just going to very gently, this is what's called degassing it, since it has expanded the air bubbles. We don't want to pound them all out, but just gently compress it down a little bit. I'm going to turn most of this into a loaf, but I do want to just really quickly show how to make a couple kinds of rolls real quick. So I'm just going to cut off a little chunk here. Set the rest aside for just a sec. So you can easily make a simple dinner roll by taking a chunk and just start to fold all the corners and edges into the center. And once you have it all kind of nicely gathered here, pinch it and then flip it over, and then just with one hand gently pressing the edges against the counter. This is kind of like when you rub a ball between your hands like this, but it's a way that it only gets pressure on the bottom and kind of starts to gather the dough under itself and hold the outer part tight. Not only does it make it look pretty, but it makes the kind of the gluten cage of the dough nice and tight, so as it expands in the bake, it'll expand evenly. So it's not a super crucial aspect if you don't get it perfect, but it makes it look nice. So there we would get a nice little dinner roll. So we'll let him go. And then the other kind of roll that I like to make is the store sells those sandwich thins. So I'm going to make a flatter roll that you can just slice in half and make a sandwich out of that. So similar to the first roll, we're just going to kind of start to tuck the corners and edges together, like so, until we again have it a nice little pinched ball here. And then we're going to flip it over. And I try not to do this too much. We're going to use a rolling pin to roll it a little bit flatter. We don't, again, just like with the degassing, we don't want to push out too many of the air bubbles because that's what's going to give us the nice fluffy texture of the bread. So I'm just going to try to go across once, twice, 3 times one direction, and then turn it over. And so we had gone this way, so now I'm going to go this way and just try to do a once, twice, 3 times maneuver again, and just get a nice, mostly round, flat roll. So I'll just set that guy there, and so I'll let them rise like that, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn the rest of the dough into a nice loaf. So for this guy, again, just kind of lightly degassing. You can do the exact same thing that I did with this roll here, just on a larger scale. Start to pull everything in and then turn it over and kind of work it around to try to use the pressure of your hands against the counter to make it into a ball. But I'm going to make more of a slender loaf. So this one's fun. You tuck over one corner, then you tuck the back side in, and then the other corner. And then you're going to go back and do the same thing again. Just kind of roll it over and pinch it down on itself. Again, doing the corner, back, corner. And then you're just going to kind of roll it down the last little bit here. So you can see I just have a little tail of dough. So I'm just going to roll it over onto itself and just start to pinch it together there. And then roll it the rest of the way onto the seam. And just kind of gently roll it back and forth to kind of tighten that seam down. Just gently tuck the ends a little bit and transfer it. I just have a piece of parchment paper here. You can use a greased cookie sheet or whatever you'd like. So again, we're going to cover them and let them do their second rise. So I'll just reuse this plastic for the rolls and get a fresh one for the loaf. And we're going to let them do the second rise now, or the proof. So this will be the last step before we put it in the oven. This is again going to be about 45 minutes to an hour. The way that you know that bread is ready to go in the oven is if I give it a poke right now, it immediately resists and pushes back out. When it's fully proofed and ready to go in the oven, when you push in, it'll resist a little bit, but there will be a lot less resistance. And I'll show you again when it's ready. Your fingerprint will stay a little bit more, but I'll show you. Alright, so it's been another hour and the bread has proofed, and we can see that it's risen quite nicely. So I'm going to poke it again and we'll see how it resists. So this time I could feel as I poked in, it resisted a lot less, and it's also doubled in size. So those are 2 good indicators that it is ready for baking. The rolls similarly have nicely risen here. So we don't have to slash the rolls, put the nice little cuts across them. The reason that we do that is there's so much volume in this bread that when it gets into the oven and gets that first hit of heat and the yeast reactivates again, it's called oven spring. There's a lot of sudden expansion. And when you have this much volume expanding very quickly, there's nowhere for it to go. So sometimes it'll split and cause really weird cracks. And it may even make a denser bread because the crust has started to form and there's nowhere for it to rise. So the reason why we make slashes is just give it room to go. So I'm going to go ahead and usually I use my lame to cut slashes in it, but you don't really need anything this fancy. You just need a really good sharp knife and just make some quick slashes in it. You don't want to push too hard. It's just a gentle drag across. And if it sticks at all, just kind of gently separate it. You might see better from that angle. We've got some nice deep slashes. So that means that when it first gets into the oven and it has that immediate rise, it'll have this extra surface area to rise into. And we don't need to do that here, but just for the appearance of it, I'm just going to put a slice in the roll. Okay, so now let me get the sheets out. I use stoneware, so it's been preheating. These just make for a nicer even bake, but you can get away with a lot of different types. You might just have to adjust with your oven temperatures and times. I've already preheated the oven for 425. And just going to move the bread onto their pans. All right. Now, when I put these in the oven, excuse me, fancy commercial ovens come with a steam injector, and what that does is it helps to get a nice crusty crust on the outside. In order to fake that on home ovens, we can just kind of spritz them with a water bottle. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to let, probably the rolls will go about 15-20 minutes. I'll just check them when they're golden and pull them out. The loaf will probably go a little bit closer to 30 minutes, and I'll show you what they look like when they're all done. All right, bread is now out of the oven. To be completely honest, I got a tiny bit distracted and let these go just a couple minutes longer than I normally would, but they're still fine. So you can definitely go anywhere from this lighter golden to this darker. This will just be a little bit of a softer crust, and this has a nice hard crust, which actually for the case of sandwiches, you do want a little bit of a softer. So just keep that in mind, that for this type of roll that is intended for a sandwich, you probably want to be aiming more for this color, if you can see that. But let's go ahead and cut into them. I do think that they're going to end up being a little bit dense. I can see that where I cut this roll, it did expand nicely where I had the slash, but it actually expanded a little bit beyond where the slash was, which indicates that it actually grew beyond the extra surface area that I gave it. So I'm really glad I gave it a slash. It could have even been deeper than that. And similarly with this loaf, I can see that the expansions look really tight, and they also started to split beyond the cut. So I could have done more cuts or gone even deeper on these. So that's just something that you start to get the feel for, and this time I got it wrong. But let's go ahead and take a look. I don't think that they're too bad. So I'll first just cut into this guy. So have a pretty good soft texture there. That should be really nice with butter. For this guy, like I recommended, we're going to cut him this way to be a sandwich, and actually this is the same way that I make homemade hamburger buns, so a nice little trick for that as well. You can hear the nice crust that we have on that, so if you're a fan of crusts, this is a great roll. So again, a really nice interior texture there for that guy. Save that for tomorrow. This guy, I'll go ahead and just make a cut on the slash. So it's not too bad. It is a little bit denser inside than I would like it. I would expect a little bit of a fluffier texture. I don't know if the quality of the camera is picking this up, but it's still not bad, and those are the basic guidelines. And with a lot of different arts, it comes with experience and just figuring out what your, the types of flour that you use, the type of pans that you use, the way that your oven works, just learning how all of that works together. And you'll get to play with it and get better at it. But as you saw, it was actually pretty easy. It did take a little bit of time and several steps, but the actual time that you have to spend with the dough itself isn't that long. So if we are home with the family, stuck inside, this is a nice opportunity to try out some bread baking, and homemade bread is just wonderful smell and taste. So hope this is helpful.